Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name's McKaylee. I'm with Tattered Cover Bookstore, and I want to thank you for being a part of our virtual community. For those of you who might not know, Tattered Cover is a local independent bookstore in the Denver metro area. We have 4 locations, soon to be a 5th, actually, in Westminster later this year, so that's very exciting for us. But we are here in the virtual space right now due to this health crisis that our world is experiencing. And Tattered Cover is known for being a communal space, and we can't do that in the same way that we used to. So we're really grateful that you're here in a virtual way and joining us tonight. This means more than you know. We wouldn't have been around for 50 years, 50. That's how long Tattered Cover's been here. Without your support. So thank you so much. And thank you for shopping locally, for keeping your money in your city. It means the world to us. We would not be here without you. And so I want to go over just a couple of housekeeping things. For those of you who might not know, we have all 4 of our locations are open right now. So you can come visit us as long as you're wearing your mask over your mouth and your nose, and then you can join us and shop and smell the books and feel the atmosphere there. But if you're like me, or like the rest of us who are preparing for this snowstorm this weekend, you can shop online at tatteredcover.com. You can also check out all of our events, upcoming events that we have at tatteredcover.com/event. We have more leaders as readers coming up, including special guest Rachel Carlson. And we also have a wonderful new series that we're launching called Tattered Cover Presents. And Tattered Cover Presents is doing a new event. They're doing it's standardized testing as that legislation comes up. So you can check that out. That is actually Monday, March 15th. Once again, tatteredcover.com/event. But the event that we're here for tonight is Leaders as Readers. Leaders as Readers is a literary event series for readers by readers. Literature has touched the lives of many in a variety of ways. We want to celebrate the stories that have influenced us, taught us, helped us grow, challenged us, and changed us. So we're doing that by inviting local, influential members of our community. We want to talk to them about books and stories. What was the book that made them fall in love with reading? What book has changed your life? What books do you recommend you read at least once? All of these questions and more will be answered as we go beyond the surface, dive into the magic of books, and authentically engage with the community through the best way that we know how, stories. And so for those of you tonight who may want it or need it, closed captioning is enabled. There's a black bar down at the bottom with a button labeled CC on it. Click that button and closed captioning is enabled for if you want it or need it. Now I want to talk about our guest tonight. Candi CdeBaca is a 5th generation Northeast Denver native and a graduate of Manuel High School in the University of Denver excuse me. She is also the first LGBTQ Latina and first Democratic Socialist to serve on the Denver City Council. She has proven that candidates whose radical politics are rooted in their lived experiences can still fight for and win a seat at the table, even when a corrupt political system stacks the odds against them. As a member of City Council, Candi co-sponsored the recently passed Charter Amendment 2E, which will bring more balance between the branches of Denver's government when it comes to mayoral appointments. She also successfully led the charge to force the city of Denver to divest from halfway houses run by private prison companies that terrorize and brutalize immigrants across the country. She has continued to be a fierce advocate against the criminalization of poverty, environmental racism, and the displacement of Denver's Black and Brown communities. Looking forward, she will continue to fight for community every day and infuse city government with policy expertise, a lens for justice, and ancestral wisdom. It's my honor to welcome our guest tonight, Councilwoman Candi CdeBaca. And we're going to have her turn on her camera. Look at her. Hello. Oh, it's so great to have you here.
Good to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. We were already talking about, before we went live tonight, your beautiful bookshelves behind you. What a brilliant background that you have there. So I'm sure we're going to have a lot to talk about here.
Yes, I'm a bibliophile for sure.
A bibliophile, yes. Well, you were saying earlier, how many books do you have in your house?
We have a little over 1,000 books.
Incredible. It's so
my dirty
incredible.
Little secret.
My mother always used to say it was an acceptable addiction. It was an addiction to books there. So I want to start at the beginning here. You have beautiful stories about your neighborhood and growing up. Can you tell us a little bit more about your childhood and what that was like?
Oh yeah, I I look at it now and I just feel like I had the best childhood growing up. I was raised with three generations in my household. So my great grandmother, she was a sharecropper in northern Colorado, and my grandma, she was a janitor at St. Joseph's, and my mom, all of us, we all lived together. So I'm the oldest of three, and got a lot of attention specifically from my great grandma and my grandma, who ultimately ended up being the primary ones to raise me. And so I just remember spending my days learning from my great grandma, being showered with her attention. And I feel like when my brother and sister came along, I had all of the tools that she gave me to shower them with attention, to teach them everything. And so I just had an awesome experience when I moved over here. When my grandpa became a pretty central part of my life, you know, he was another one that his motto was a bored kid is a lazy kid. So there was no opportunity for me to be bored. There was always something to be done, always something to be learned, and spent a lot of time just learning new things.
So, who ultimately was the person who first introduced you to reading, or did you do that yourself? Can you tell us a little bit more about how that came into your life?
That's why my great grandmother is so important to my life. She, as I mentioned, was a sharecropper and didn't make it past second grade. She was also an epileptic, so she would have seizures on her way to their little schoolhouse, and her parents decided that, you know, she needed to be working. And so she never learned how to read. And she spent the rest of her life teaching herself how to read. And so every single morning, I remember I would wake up and come to the kitchen, and we called her Nana. My Nana would be sitting there at the kitchen table religiously every single day, reading the Rocky Mountain News from front to back. And she taught me how to read. My mom and my grandma were both addicted to romance novels too. So if I wasn't reading the newspaper and learning from my great grandma, I was learning from my mom and my grandma reading their romance novels. And my oldest cousin was always very talented as a writer. And so by the time I think I was maybe 8 or 9 years old, my cousin, who was 6 years older than me, was already trying to write her own book. And so I was always very exposed to lovers of the written word.
So then, what were some of your first books? You mentioned the romance novels and obviously the Rocky Mountain News, which is vitally important, and the stories that our local newspapers tell is huge. Do you remember some of the titles that you loved back then?
Well, I skipped over children's books very quickly. And when I was a child, I loved the Bernstein Bears. Everything Bernstein Bears, and then eventually it was the Sweet Valley series and the Boxcar Children. But I moved quickly into an author named V.C. Andrews. And
Yes.
my cousin would read those out loud to me. So I, by the time I was 10 years old, I was at least two books into the V.C. Andrews series by myself.
That's awesome. I'm gonna have trouble not like fangirling this whole interview with you of like, yes, let's just recommend books to each other. But I,
Yeah,
I love that
a lot of
that you
fun.
I love that you were able to um, you know, kind of jump ahead and be able to expose yourself to a whole world out there. Books were able to open those doors for you. I'm curious, as a LGBTQ Latina woman, when was the first time you saw yourself in literature? Was it as a child or was it not until later in your life?
You know, it was interesting because when I was reading, I never really saw myself as an LGBTQ Latina. I really identified with the characters in the book on a deeper level. And so I think it was really little pieces of all of it. You know, I wanted to be the little Bernstein Bears in their treehouse. And, you know, I would see my siblings in their little siblings. And then when I got to VC Andrews, my top two favorites in her line of books is Heaven and Dark Angel, and I saw myself in those characters. And so it wasn't until I was older that I started to, want to read pieces of literature from Black people, from Brown people, from LGBTQ people. In high school, or actually, it was a little bit before high school, I had read a book called Tears of a Tiger. And Tears of a Tiger changed my life in a range of different ways. But it wasn't until after I had read the book and looked back that I realized that that was probably the first Black author I had ever read. And I saw myself in those characters. It was so pivotal for me because of how identifiable their lives and their stories were to, me and my friends and the people around me.
Your high school experience was so the stories that are surrounded are so fascinating to many of people, and how you took such an active role in activism at such a young age. You have stories that have influenced that. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and then maybe talk about if there's any pieces of literature that helped or inspired you during that time?
Well, before I tell you any that inspired me, if anybody wants to read a little bit about my experience, one of my really good friends here in Colorado, Ben Kirshner, he wrote a book that talked a lot about my own experience in DPS. I made a cameo in there, and it's called Youth Activism, Youth Activism in an Era of Inequality by Ben Kirshner. And it talks a lot about my experience as a high school student and being experimented on by the public education system during the first wave of our neoliberal ed reform movement. And during that time, I can't remember exactly a lot of what I was reading at the time, because I was by then I was just inhaling books. And I think a lot of what I used books for at that time was more of an escape. It wasn't necessarily to inspire me. It was an alternative reality and a way to learn about the possibilities that the world held for me. Um, I would say during that time, a favorite book I had back then. Hmm.
If you don't
I
remember right off the
definitely,
bat, it's okay. You obviously are a rabid reader. Like, that's awesome. So it's okay, but it might come to you later as well.
yeah, I don't have a specific one that I can think of back then.
That's okay. While we're still on the topic of back then, can you tell us a little bit of us? Can you tell us a little bit more about Project Voice?
That's my baby. And a lot of what the book I mentioned earlier is about. So, Project Voice was an organization that was birthed by us, the youth and the people of our community, to solve the challenges of being left out, of being excluded from these major education reforms that were happening to us. We had, when I was a high school student, in my second year, my school was being converted from a traditional high school to the first co-location, which meant that they were breaking it down to three smaller schools within a school. And that kind of happened overnight. We went home for the summer, came back, and we were attending a different school. And it was interesting because my siblings, we were on different floors of the school and had no real role in deciding that. And so I experienced that, fought throughout my high school career for a lot of things that people take for granted. When we split up into three, we lost our electives, we lost honors classes, AP classes. So a lot of my high school career was spent fighting for those things. I remember fighting for an AP class, and the only AP class we got in the whole school was AP European History, and I was taking it at lunch by myself. And so that colored my experience. Obviously, when I got to college, um, I started to realize how my experience was very different than most of my peers in college. They didn't have those kind of things happen to them. And so it was the first time I really recognized systemic injustice and how the game was rigged. And so when I came back to Denver, I had to come back. My grandmother had a heart attack in my first year of college in San Diego. And I had to decide if I was going to drop out or transfer. Um, and I ended up transferring to DU. And when I came back, DPS was proposing to shut down Manual High School at that time. Their reform, the co-location had failed. And I was so enraged about my own experience and the juxtaposition with my peers in San Diego that I started organizing in the community to file a class action lawsuit against DPS. And we were pretty successful at the organizing, successful enough that DPS bargained with us to allow community to be part of a renewal process. And it was this year-long process where we were giving our ideas and feedback about what we wanted to see in a school when it reopened. And the final report didn't include any of the things that people in the community had been asking for, not even the most basic element of getting a bilingual principal. And so I was enraged and, had felt like we really got duped. I dropped this lawsuit, and now what were we going to do? And a mentor who had founded Youth Biz convinced me to channel that energy into creating an organization that would eventually train, employ, and organize youth in our community to insert their voices into education policy on the front end. And so that's how Project Voice was born. And we're actually 15 years old this year. Yeah.
Congratulations. That's incredible.
Thank
I
you.
I'm curious about, because one of the things that is so fascinating to me about Project Voice is nothing about us without us, that you guys use that slogan. And it really is such an advocate for the voices of young people, which are so often overlooked. What role do you think literature plays in inspiring, advocating for young people? I know the YA genre has a lot to do with it, but I'm curious if that ever plays a role in your your conversations with young students.
Yeah. We built our own curriculum from the ground up, and we did it with the help of my friend who I mentioned earlier, Ben Kirshner, and so many others, including Vanessa Roberts, who's currently the executive director. And it was all rooted in what we've taken from autobiographies, memoirs of people who have participated in these revolutionary struggles throughout time. Um, the curriculum really also uplifted participatory action research. And participatory action research is a way to do research um, that benefits, that actually translates into action. And you're required to do lit reviews. You're required to understand the body of knowledge around any given issue, and we teach that to young people. This is something that I didn't get access to until I was in college, and so what we try to do is take the type of curriculum, the rigorous curriculum you get in college, and give it to young people like me, Black and brown, poor kids, much sooner in their career. Because I found that often growing up, we were so angry and so frustrated by the experiences and the forces acting upon us, and we were striking out and punching at something invisible. And what literature really does is help us give a name, give a tangible structure and body to systemic injustice.
Do you remember or know any of the books that are either currently on the curriculum or some of those original biographies and memoirs that you were talking about?
Yeah, we teach our kids about everybody from, Malcolm X to Huey Newton. We talk to the kids about Che, we talk to the kids about Malala. Um, we break down these movements for them and teach them about SNCC. We teach them about the Children's March and how young people have always played this pivotal role in any and all social movements globally.
Yes. Sorry, I didn't have a follow-up question. I was just so inspired. I apologize.
A
Uh,
really important one to our curriculum. I don't know if you've heard of Paulo Freire and
tell me.
pedagogy of the oppressed um, was, I think, really critical to us forming our popular education model. Um, that is kind of at the foundation of what we do and how we do it as an organization.
Well, I'm going to add that book to my TBR and my to be read list. And I want to remind all of the viewers that if you registered for this event, you will be getting an email afterwards with all the list of books that we talked about tonight. So if you missed something, if you're furiously writing it down or you need to know what it is, don't worry. We will have that list for you afterwards. I want to pivot a little bit to your um, your councilwoman career, your career on city council. And one of the things that I read about you, if you don't mind, was you were asked once, what are your ideas for Denver? And you said, I've been collecting a notebook full of them. And I want to ask about notebooks. Are you a journaler? Do you have a specific style or a pen or something that you love?
Oh my God. So this is one of my notebooks, and I'm known in the community for my binders. I catalog everything in my garage. I have literally every binder from every grade, all the way from high school through my entire college career. Um, I have to write things down. It's almost part of how I catalog things in my brain. If I don't write it down, it doesn't stick. So I'm the person who highlights, who writes, who had planners, handwritten planners up until I finally parted ways, probably maybe like 6 years ago. I went digital, but I'm always writing things down. I'm always journaling. I'm always taking notes. It's just part of how I learn.
Is that something that you would ever be interested maybe in morphing into writing one day? Is that something that you've ever, being such a voracious reader, do you ever think that maybe I can do this?
Yeah, I actually started my book. I had an interesting conversation with a really good friend of mine, Hasira Soul Watson. He's the son of Lauren Watson, who was the founder of Denver's Black Panther Party. And we were talking a lot about my experience on council and kind of what I've been going through and witnessing. And he told me, sis, you need to be writing this down. I hope you're journaling every night because this is a best-selling book. And when I journal, I wasn't ever really journaling about my job, or how I got here or any of that. And he just changed the way I was thinking about what I was writing and gave it kind of a body that it didn't have before. And so, about 4 days after we had that conversation, I was taking a shower and I saw a crack in the wall, and I was like, I've got it. And I started writing my book. And so I wrote the first pages of my eventual book.
So then eventually, hopefully, we'll host you for an author event as well.
Yeah.
Congratulations, though. That's never easy to take that first step creatively in any process. So that's wonderful and good for you for being
Thank
able to
you.
do that. I want to ask, this is a little bit of a different writing question, but if you, what books do you wish you would have written that are like high up on your list that you're like, dang, I would have loved it if I had come up with that?
Hmm. I feel like one one book that I think was really influential in me deciding to run and how I've kind of looked at my job is called How to Kill a City. And that one, when I read it, I felt like all of a sudden, like I had the expertise to have written that book. He was the author. I can't remember his name. Was a journalist and kind of just a lover of research and someone who knew how to do research really well and study trends. And he put together this body of information that kind of pointed out how these specific trends really changed cities across America. And I felt like I had been collecting that data and information myself just in doing research about my own lived experience with the highway and gentrification. And so by the end of that book, I kind of was like, dang, I should have, one day I will.
I love asking that question because you always get such a unique answer. And I love that you compared it to your own expertise. And I want to ask you about learning. What do books teach you? And not like specific facts or anything, but when you're reading them, what do they do for you? What do they teach you in your life?
Well, the main thing I think I've gotten from books is empathy. Um, when you're able to immerse yourself in a book and really do that cliche, you're living in someone else's shoes, and if it's well written, I think you can't see yourself separate from the author of the book or the characters in the book anymore. They almost become an extension of who you are, and when you have this amassed knowledge or collection of characters in your mind, in your heart, it's easier to connect with other people in the world. It's easier to understand what people might be going through on a different level. And so for me, I think that's been the primary thing I've gotten from reading. I would also say that reading is always a, a way for me to connect with a higher power. Um, some people, I do this really weird thing with all our books. Um, I'll when I'm lost or when I need guidance, I'll put that energy out to the universe and grab a book, any book that's calling me in the room, and just open it up to a page. And I feel like I always get a lesson wherever I am, no matter what book I pick, from a higher power. I feel like there's guidance that can come to you through literature. And so for me, it's all about connection to other people, to other experiences, to other worlds, to my creator. Um, and that's like the best thing I think that I've learned from reading.
I don't know how to get a better answer than that. That's excellent. And I want to let you know that it's not that weird. For a lot of us readers, I can recall and know and have heard stories of people talking about the right book falling in your lap at the right moment. Um, do you have one of those stories that you can share with us of maybe what that book was? And you don't have to get too deep if you don't want to, but this idea of, oh, that book did something for me when I needed it.
Right now, so don't judge.
Never.
My wife is also a writer and a poet and just a lover of books. And so our connection time, we read to each other. And so there was a book that she was reading recently called The City We Became. And it's been it's been really interesting because it's it's kind of a Afrofuturistic type of um, situation that is grounded in reality, in policy, in government, in what is actually happening in the world. And this like story about this main character really spoke to me because it painted a regular person um, as a superhero, as someone who could fight these evil forces of systemic injustice, but it talked about it in a different way. And I think that to me was like really affirming. It was obviously a great moment for me and her to connect, but it was, channeling that higher power talking to me and just reassuring me that I'm on the right path.
That's excellent, and it's a fantastic book. Thank you for mentioning it. It's such a wonderful, wonderful book. I want to ask like one or two questions before we end tonight here. You have throughout this interview have talked about wonderful women in your life, from your great grandmother to your mother, your wife. What books would you recommend to the women in your life and to the women that you will meet in the future?
So these are books that Tattered Cover must carry, and they're not all out yet. Um,
Okay.
but especially as the largest Black-owned bookstore, the women around me are all amazing, and I have so many writers around me. So a new one that just came out is my great friend Susie Q. It's called The Gospel of Bones. One of my best friends, Chloe Luvuezo, is the author of Life I Swear, and that's coming. It's not out yet. Elaine Welteroth wrote More Than Enough, and that's amazing. She's one of our friends. My friend Rue Johnson is in the process of writing her first book called First Cousins, Cannabis, and Hip Hop. And the one I'm most excited about, one of my best friends, Cecily Bowen, she is coming out with her new book in October called Bad Fat Black Girl. And that one I have been waiting for many years because I lived with her as this book was being born and shaped. And so I'm just dying to see it on paper and to feel it and to read it.
That's amazing. And I want to tell everyone too that when you get your list, there'll be links to tattercover.com and you can pre-order them actually, so that you can make sure that you get the books in your hand day of release so that you can have them. I'm also going to be sending this list to our buying department to make sure that they have them on their list.
Yes.
So thank you, Candi, for
Awesome.
for making sure our bookshelves have all of these new books in them as well.
Yes.
The last question I want to end is a little bit of a fun one, but what's on your nightstand right now? What are you reading right now?
So right now,
Oh, we can show and tell. Yay.
our reading time with my wife, Ta-Nehisi Coates' The Water Dancer, that one, and My Grandmother's Hands. These are the two that my wife is reading to me, and this is the one that I'm reading by myself. Stakes is High by Michael Denzel Smith.
Thank you. The glare was a little hard on that one. That's awesome. Thank you so much. Candi, like I said, I feel like I could talk books and shoot recommendations back and forth to each other all night long, but I want to honor your time and our viewers' time. So I want to give you the chance to remind people who you are, where they can find you online, and any other books you cannot leave tonight without mentioning.
I'm Candi CdeBaca, Denver City Councilwoman for District 9. You can find me on all socials. I'm the only Candi CdeBaca in the world, and I'm very active on socials. Thank you all for being here with us tonight. Thank you all for sharing this love of reading with me. If you have any time and want great reads, quick, easy reads, my go-to books that I read at least once a year are The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, Don Miguel Ruiz's Mastery of Love, and of course, as I mentioned earlier, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. So check them out.
Candi, thank you for these recommendations. They are invaluable and wonderful. It is always a pleasure to meet a fellow reader and to have a reader in our community that is so vibrant, outspoken, and fighting for the people. So thank you so much for that. We greatly appreciate it. I want to remind everybody, that you will be getting an email with all of Candi's recommendations that she talked about tonight so that you don't have to be scribbling them down furiously. But you can also use this link. If you do want to scribble them down, you can rewatch it using the same link that you logged on with tonight. I want to thank you guys again for joining us, for shopping locally, for keeping your money local. On the off chance you haven't eaten dinner yet, maybe ordering from a local mom and pop restaurant, shopping locally. It means the world to us. A lot of businesses would not be here right now during this health crisis without you. So thank you so much for that. Candi, if you'll stick around while I close this out here.
Yes.
Once again, you can get these books at tatteredcover.com or at any of our 4 locations in the Denver metro area. We really appreciate your support and can't thank you guys enough for having us be around for 50 years now. So stay safe, everybody. Happy reading. Thanks all. And we're out.
Yay! That was fun.